Hello, New Paltz. Welcome to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. I'm here every Wednesday at 9 a.m. talking movies, new reviews, recommendations, lists. I just love movies, and that's what I do here. On today's show, I'm going to review recent films Exit 8 and Beast, share my 10 favorite comic book movies of all time, and close out the show with my 3 throwback recommendations for this week. I'll be right back, but first here's some movie music, starting with Theme from Hoosiers by Jerry Goldsmith from the Hoosiers score. Welcome back to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. Kicking off the show today, let's talk about the new video game adaptation, Exit 8. Directed by Genki Kawamura, a man, played by Kazunari Niyomiya, becomes increasingly desperate when he realizes he is trapped in a subway station, needing to complete a mission to get out. This is one I'd seen a little bit about. I'm not familiar with the video game it's based off of, but the idea sounded interesting. Didn't know too much about where this goes or what it was building to. I went in pretty fresh. I think this is a really unique thriller that is something different I'm glad I saw this weekend. Right off the bat with this opening, you get some really grabbing camera work with these perspectives they capture and bringing you into the everyday life of this man who is on his way home on the subway. The camera work puts you in his shoes as it sets up these details that tie into the themes of this story and what this strange situation means for the character. And the direction also does a great job at making you feel disoriented with this idea of the character finding himself in this loop in the subway all of a sudden. The camera work of the windiness of the corridors and how eerie it all is, tracking him as things start to repeat. The design of the set being this very sterile and clean subway station that looks really normal, but the repetition of it and seeing the character start to realize his situation. The camera work and design of this hallway makes you feel the terror of this and just finding yourself all of a sudden in a loop. And then you're introduced to the rules of this puzzle and what the character has to do to get out, and it had my attention and had some really clever developments. One complaint I do have with this movie is that with the concept of this loop, it can certainly feel repetitive and monotonous at points. Following the character as he goes through the steps of this and faces progress and setbacks in the loop, there's a repetition of what he's doing that feels a little tired after a few times through. There were a few times where I'm like, alright, can we move it a little bit? I get the repetition is an important element of the story, and seeing the character through this gives you a sense of the real-time stress and terror of this, but as a viewing experience, it starts to get dull at points, and I can forgive this a little with this story because there are strong emotions and themes it is tackling with this sci-fi-ish concept that I think the repetition does work at developing. I don't want to say too much about what these are or other story elements that go into it. I personally enjoyed going into this movie not knowing too much, but there's an element of doubt and fixation on these details that I think, with some of the other elements going into this and some of the twists, make this not just a freaky psychological horror experience, but there's emotions there that, over time, I got more invested in this man as a character and not just the nameless guy we're watching in this puzzle. And I think Kazunari Niyomiya's performance contributes a lot to that as well, as he shows the panic and fear of being in this as well as dealing with other things in his life, the confusion and this obsession he shows with figuring this out, and some of the more personal elements of him make him quite engaging. We don't know a ton about him, but what the story is exploring in his journey in the subway, you do feel for him by the end. And then with the horror elements, there's some creepy visuals that add on to that eerie atmosphere, what threats different parts of this puzzle represent. Some horror elements work better for me than others. It goes for a few different kinds here that I think different people will find more effective than others. And overall, just the creepiness of this loop and the mystery of it and how terrifying it would be is brought to life so powerfully with the direction, the set design, and performance here. So if you want a really unique psychological horror movie, check out Exit 8. If you're a fan of the game, I don't know if you'll like this as an adaptation because I'm not familiar with the game, but just as a horror experience and something really unique, I'm glad I checked this one out. I give Exit 8 a 77 out of 100. I'll be right back on Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale, but first here's some more movie music, starting with Trust Me by Brad Fiedel from the Terminator 2 Judgment Day score. Welcome back to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. Next up today, let's talk about Beast, a new MMA film that released last weekend. Directed by Tyler Atkins, MMA legend Patton James, played by Daniel McPherson, now a commercial fisherman, is pulled back into the cage when his brother is in danger. Reuniting with his old coach Sammy, played by Russell Crowe, he commits to one final fight in one championship against its brutal champion Xavier Grau. I just heard about this one right before it came out. I barely saw any marketing for it, I just saw it was an MMA movie and Russell Crowe was on the poster as a coach, and I'm like, alright, I'm in. I can always be down for a good sports movie. Even if it has a lot of the cliches and is predictable, if you bring the emotions and pull off an engaging story, I love what they have to offer. This one promised Russell Crowe as a trainer this return to the ring with his family and brother drama, and it was very underwhelming. It starts off with a decent setup of this guy Patton, who was once an MMA legend that retires and starts a family. There's the financial struggle as he's trying to support them and make ends meet, and you get a little of the dynamic with Russell Crowe's character with this opening. And at the start I was thinking, there's some very cheesy dialogue, the performances aren't great delivering these very on-the-nose lines, but it's alright. If they bring the emotions of this story with the sports and the family, I can be down for this. And then it keeps going and follows what you'd expect from the story as he returns to the ring, but the script does such a poor job at giving meaningful depth to the different areas of this story. You have him return to the gym to be trained and reunite with Russell Crowe's character and the family there and see some of the estrangement and resentment between them. And this seemed like it should be one of the more impactful parts of the movie with this relationship, and the script gives nothing to this history or the conflict between them. The explanation of what went down and why they feel the way they do is so shallow and doesn't make much sense. The relationship feels so underdeveloped early on, and what they did give with eventually explaining this history barely added any more depth and was not compelling. And then there's the dynamic with the brother that also has so little depth to it. There's the cliche of the little brother feeling abandoned and the bitterness there, but there's so little given that makes you care about this relationship and what went down exactly. You don't feel the impact of the bond with these brothers. They don't even feel like brothers for a lot of the time. The conflict that builds between them is so poorly explained and seems to come out of nowhere. And the brother character is so nasty and irritating, and not having that complex history or a more meaningful reason why the characters have this divide, there's nothing to really get invested in or feel the emotions of. I will say that the element of him coming out of retirement to support his family had some harder-hitting emotional moments. That relationship with his wife and his daughter certainly had more depth to it than some of the other relationships. So seeing this return and him taking on the new champ, that was easily the strongest emotions it provides in terms of what you would want from a sports movie like this. I will also say the fights here are really good. They're definitely not realistic MMA fights, they're certainly movie fights, but they are exciting. The hits feel so brutal when they connect. There's some nice choreography with the ducking and dodging and counterattacks, some of these takedowns and holds. The action of the final fight delivered for me, but man, the emotions and character work here is really poor. These relationships are not developed enough to make these scenes have the impact they need. The conflict feels so forced and the dialogue is so phony and cheesy. I wasn't expecting a great movie here, I just wanted a decent sports movie that has strong emotions and some exciting sports moments. When it comes to the action, you do get some great fights, but the lackluster characters and conflict is not enough to make up for that. I can't recommend this one. I give Beast a 50 out of 100. I'll be right back on Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale, but first here's some more movie music, starting with Main Title by Bill Conti from the Karate Kid score. Welcome back to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. Next up today, I'm going to share my 10 favorite comic book movies of all time. I haven't done a real comic book movie list yet on this show, but it's one of my favorite genres. Before I got into more movies, I started with getting into the MCU and getting caught up on the movies there and getting invested in that saga. That was super exciting leading up to Infinity War coming out. And then I started watching all kinds of movies from there and getting into different genres and filmmakers. But being a fan of movies really started with this genre for me. I've been watching comic book movies pretty much my whole life, so I gotta talk about some of my favorites. Let's get right into this. I will spoil some things here and there. At number 10, I'm gonna go with James Gunn's The Suicide Squad from 2021. This is perhaps my most rewatched movie released this decade, because I watched this movie so much in 2021, and I've watched it many times since. It was one of the movies they released on HBO Max the same day it hit theaters, and it stayed there for about a month. That was one of Warner Brothers' COVID release strategies, and I did see this movie in theaters, and then I rewatched it so much at home. I still love going back to this one. James Gunn makes a far better movie than the 2016 film was. He was allowed more creative freedom than David Ayer was on that first film, and the whole WB studio interference nonsense with that movie, so you can't blame David Ayer too much for how that turned out, but giving James Gunn this franchise for his first DC film made for a dark, fun, and beautiful movie. I really like the concept of these darker stories, led by villains and anti-heroes, taking characters with darker backstories, working in this government shadowy world of DC. The story of this movie sends this team to an island to stop this anti-American regime in this country, having to infiltrate this government facility on this island where they are targets. It's a simple story, but it's one that leads to this more spy thriller element with the characters sneaking around. Lots of hand-to-hand and gun action, that espionage element, but also tons of superhero, sillier action. The battle with Starro at the end is a crazy monster fight with fun moments. There's superpowers here with really dynamic visuals, like with Polka Dot Man, King Shark's massive size and power, Bloodsport and Peacemaker's crazy weapons and gadgets. They really nailed the mix of the darker and more grounded elements of a government and spy thriller. With the larger action and sillier and comic booky action and visuals, it flows really well in the story and it all fits well. The cast of characters here is also wonderful. Margot Robbie's Harley Quinn, Idris Elba's Bloodsport, John Cena's Peacemaker, and more all have personality and fun. The team dynamic has humor and emotion with them coming together, the ways they bond, some tense and sad moments like Peacemaker's betrayal and him killing Rick Flag. Where that goes in the Peacemaker show is really compelling as well, and that plot element here is really tragic. The dynamic with Bloodsport and Daniela Melchor's Ratcatcher has a lot of heart with the parenting elements there. David Dastmalchian's Polka Dot Man has a strange but powerful arc. This movie has so much to love. The action is thrilling and works in humor and danger. The characters are fun and deep. I love the visuals and cinematography. I'm so glad they let James Gunn make this. At number 9, I'm going to go with The Avengers. This movie is one of the most meaningful to me on this list. Like I said, comic book movies and the MCU specifically were some of my earliest memories of really being into movies and these stories and getting super into following the behind the scenes and the larger world of kind of movie news. Eventually that grew to film as a whole and not just these franchises, but the MCU was so good at bringing this world together with these connected movies and making each movie tie in, introduce characters and then have them meet, team up, get these dynamics. And I remember watching the first movies of the MCU and then getting to the Avengers and being amazed at this movie. The early MCU was so good at making the universe connected. There were fewer characters. This movie you just had the original 6, but you had other organizations and side characters like S.H.I.E.L.D. and Nick Fury and Phil Coulson that brought these movies together. And here the story is so well built at making all the characters and individual movies tie in. You already have S.H.I.E.L.D. that all the original 6 members have some ties to that has a lot of the world building in place. So setting the story so much there, with Nick Fury being the one to bring them together, was really smart. You get Loki returning as the villain that seeks to take over the planet with an alien army. The threat feels so big here. The Tesseract gets taken. The feeling of a big battle on the way brings some dread. You feel the importance of all these characters needing to work their differences out and come together to fight. The conflict between the team uses the characters really well. The dialogue and using what we know about these characters to have this drama is handled really well by Joss Whedon. Cap and Tony's tension here and that scene with them arguing, but also Thor and Bruce Banner offering their perspectives on these ideas of power and S.H.I.E.L.D.'s plans. The larger world and characters are really well developed and worked into the story here. The action is awesome, the collaborations are clever and use the strengths of the characters in fun ways. The final battle of New York is the best example of this. It's a huge army and the characters all have their role to play. You feel the power and fun of the team coming together and them avenging Phil Coulson and saving Earth. Loki later on in the saga gets his redemption arc, but here seeing him defeated as the villain was so satisfying. This movie is still so fun today, the action is excellent, and the writing and character dynamics have some strong drama. The effects are outstanding, this is a classic. At number 8, I'm going to go with Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Really, I'll combine Into the Spider-Verse and Across the Spider-Verse here. I couldn't pick one of these over the other. These are two of my favorite animated films of all time. Right away with the animation alone, these are beautiful movies. Every frame has so much color and detail. The comic book details with the sound effects and how these characters move, the web swinging and classic Spider-Man imagery, but then you also have that multiverse element with these other spider people and worlds, and seeing how these worlds are created with so much life and care. The movement of everything and the staging of these sequences, the What's Up Danger scene in the first film and seeing Miles leaping and swinging is a great example of this. You get the feeling of Spider-Man swinging through the city, with also falling through these other worlds and visiting all these unique places. This is such a wonderful blending of classic Spider-Man elements with the color of these other worlds and what they were able to pull off with the multiverse concept in animation, both with making all these worlds unique, how dynamic the action is, and also the amount of detail, especially something like the chase and Across the Spider-Verse, and seeing all these visual details with all the spider people. You can tell how much care and passion went into these movies, and even beyond the animation and how beautiful that is, you also get some incredible Spider-Man stories in these movies. You get Miles Morales as the lead, getting some unique elements of the origin story, with him working with other spider people and learning from them, and some classic elements as well, like dealing with some tragedy in his life and struggling as he's growing up. There's a great story of Miles here learning to believe in himself and having this mentor relationship with Peter B. Parker. That character also has an amazing arc with dealing with his struggles and working through his fear of failure. These movies have amazing themes of believing in yourself, being a hero, and doing the right thing. The multiverse story brings the color and gorgeous visuals and some humor, but ultimately this is a deep and meaningful story with beautiful character arcs and classic Spider-Man elements. I cannot wait for the next film. These are masterful animated and comic book movies. At number 7, I'm going to go with Spider-Man 2. This barely edges out the Spider-Verse films for me. This one never disappoints, though. This did come out before I was born. I watched it for the first time sometime in middle school, and I've loved it ever since. I was into the MCU first and loved that as a big saga and getting invested in all these characters in this larger world. But these Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire Spider-Man movies, focusing on the day-to-day life of Peter Parker and him going through everyday and relatable parts of life, brings so much heart. The first movie, you get the origin story, him losing Uncle Ben and learning responsibility as he's growing up and dealing with struggles in his life while being a superhero. And here you get him in college, a little bit into adulthood, trying to make time for all parts of his life and struggling to make it to class, keep a job, maintain relationships. You see him trying to be Peter Parker and Spider-Man, being the hero that saves lives and stops criminals, but also he's a young man. He wants to do all these things, but he has so much on his plate. Spider-Man is such a relatable hero, and having this hero with a good heart that does these amazing things as a hero, it's incredible drama that this movie has some amazing moments with. Tobey Maguire as his character brings the relatability. He's friendly and a little awkward. He's a good man. He shows the frustration and struggle as well, how he's trying to make it work as so much is going wrong in his life. The conflict with MJ and Harry, I love how personal this movie feels. Alfred Molina as Doc Ock is an amazing villain. I love his arc and his presence as the villain that means something to Peter personally, and that forces him to become Spider-Man again and save the city. The train scene is beautiful, the action is thrilling, and the web-swinging visuals and choreography of these fights is electric. Danny Elfman's score is so heroic and emotional. This movie has so much of the beauty of this character and why he's so iconic, what being Spider-Man means to him, how it can make things in his life difficult, but also how he gets to save lives, and what he means to the city of New York. This is one of the most emotional comic book movies of all time in my opinion, and the best Spider-Man movie. At number 6, I'm going to go with Captain America Civil War. I love the Avengers for what it did at bringing this world together with this team and coming up with a smart way to tie all these characters together and build these relationships that continue throughout the saga. And Captain America Civil War is another brilliant use of this world and all the character building done during the Infinity Saga to have a meaningful crossover. The Avengers have been a team for a few years now, continuing to fight these battles for the world, and the question of oversight and collateral damage of their battles comes up with the introduction of the Sokovia Accords that would bring the Avengers under the control of the government, and you get an incredibly written divide between the team on this, particularly between Cap and Tony. Cap is nervous about the Accords after seeing so much government corruption in Captain America the Winter Soldier, but Tony wants it after Age of Ultron and seeing what destruction the Avengers battles can cause after he created Ultron. The writing of these debate scenes between these two, and really the whole team as they discuss things and try to figure out how they want to move forward and trying to keep the team together. At this point in the MCU, the dynamic between the team and the bonds they form make you care about their divide not just for the sake of the world and them as heroes, but also them as friends. Cap and Tony becoming friends, but also disagreeing with each other a lot over the years. This conflict between them is really tragic. The team falling apart and the trust and bonds breaking. The final battle with Cap, Tony, and Bucky is so personal. With Bucky also, you have the elements of Cap trying to protect his friend, and all this as he's used by Zemo, who I also think is a strong villain here with his motivation of losing his family in the Battle of Sokovia and blaming the Avengers. The themes of friendship and loyalty and trust come into play here to have this great drama. The crossover here and this story get the conflict and writing down, so you feel the tragedy of this story, and it makes the comic book elements have weight to them. It's awesome to have these heroes crossing over and fighting, and getting Spider-Man in this, and getting the introduction of Chadwick Boseman as Black Panther, who is awesome here. The airport battle and the other action here, the hand-to-hand fights are thrilling here, and continue that great fight choreography of the Winter Soldier. But the story is wonderfully built with the rest of the universe in continuing the saga, and being a story with human themes coming into play, this is one of the hardest-hitting MCU movies. At number 5, I'm going to go with Guardians of the Galaxy. Another James Gunn movie makes this list. I really love his comic book movies and what he brings to his projects. The Guardians of the Galaxy as a franchise and as characters, even independent of the larger MCU, means so much to me. I was into these movies and watched them for the first time even before I was a fan of the larger MCU and got invested in the Infinity Saga. Me and my dad loved these movies. I watched these and loved these characters and this family dynamic among the team. This team of characters all having tragedies in their past that makes them feel alone and outcasts, and having them find each other and forming this family that is able to save the galaxy. Chris Pratt as Star-Lord, and him losing his mother as a child, and then being brought into this larger galaxy as an outlaw. You have this plot device with the orb and this chase for it that runs throughout the story that brings the characters to meet each other. Zoe Saldana as Gamora and her struggle being an adopted child of Thanos and wanting to do the right thing and go against him. Dave Bautista as Drax is wonderful here, as this funny character that also shows the rage and sadness at losing his family. Bradley Cooper as Rocket is one of my all-time favorite MCU characters. He's so complex and is funny, but also has a tough shell and pushes people away as a defense for struggling with his past and his insecurity about himself. And Vin Diesel as Groot is such a lovable character, and his sacrifice at the end is one of my favorite MCU scenes. This whole team dynamic and seeing how coming together helps each of them grow and work through their pasts, the amount of care and love James Gunn shows with these characters, and would continue to show throughout this trilogy, makes this emotional and meaningful. It's a fun space adventure as well that develops the space and wider galaxy of the MCU, some development with Thanos and his overall plan of the saga. The visuals of the planets and space battles are so colorful, and each planet has a special look to it. The city of Xandar, the grimy underworld look of Nowhere. The world building here is really well incorporated. The action here is excellent. The prison break is thrilling. The final battle is huge with these space battles. The score and soundtrack bring so much personality as well. James Gunn makes this such a special movie that starts one of my favorite areas of the MCU with these characters and their story. At number 4, I'm going to go with Avengers Endgame. This was one of my most anticipated movies of all time. I suppose I could include Infinity War in this as well, but I love Endgame as the finale to the Infinity Saga that, like I said, I had been so invested in for a few years before this. Seeing the build up to this and all the characters I love reaching this point where everyone crosses over in Infinity War to take on Thanos, who is this massive threat to the universe, and then them losing in Infinity War, and this movie having the survivors come together to make things right and avenge the universe. I love that the main survivors that this movie follows were mainly the original 6 Avengers. These are the main characters we'd been following for the longest now. The movie had to primarily be focused on them and closing out their journeys. Tony and Cap and the rest of the team have dealt with the snap in different ways in 5 years, and Ant-Man comes in and introduces a way it can be undone, and you revisit some of the history of the MCU and working in the past really well to bring this all to an end. The universe is avenged in what is perhaps the best final battle in the MCU, with the entire saga coming together to defeat Thanos' army, and the epic moments there. Tony Stark makes his sacrifice to defeat Thanos and save the universe. Cap gets to settle down with Peggy Carter in the past and get the life he's always deserved. Natasha also sacrifices herself and be a hero once again. This movie and where it takes the characters to some ends, in working in the larger MCU with still the Guardians of the Galaxy, with Ant-Man, and making this a story about grief and dealing with failure and working together to work through it and make things right. The movie is such a powerful conclusion that is so emotional, and I remember watching it for the first time in theaters and being so excited and satisfied with this finale. The time travel is fun, there's some great huge action and quieter moments, like Tony having one last conversation with his father in the past. I love some recent MCU projects, but as far as the saga and this massive story, this is the end that tied it all together beautifully. It gave me all I wanted from it. At number 3, I'm going to go with Logan. This is another powerful finale that is also an extremely different kind of movie from Avengers Endgame, but also features a powerful end to a character that had been around for so long and has had a long journey. Hugh Jackman's Wolverine is an iconic comic book movie character. He has returned since this movie in Deadpool and Wolverine as a multiverse variant of the character, but this is the true ending of this character, and it's a brutal drama that I'm so glad it was able to be made. It has the R rating that this story requires. Logan at the end of his life in hiding. Mutants are almost all extinct. His healing powers are wearing off. And he's taking care of an also very old Charles Xavier. The two have been through so much together and have formed this bond. And seeing them in this old age dealing with this trauma is so tragic. Logan gets approached to take this young mutant who was experimented on to Canada to get her to safety. Daphne Keane as X-23 is an incredible performance here. The two have a compelling dynamic of both having trauma of their past and trying to make it on this journey, and on the way there's so much heartbreak and tragedy. Things feel so bad, but you're trying to hold on to the hope that they can make it. Where it builds to this ending, where Logan is the hero once more and saves these kids with the last strength he has left, is so powerful. The ending of him sacrificing himself for them and getting to rest with his last act being the hero after he's dealt with trauma and self-hatred for so long is a perfect ending for this character. Hugh Jackman and Patrick Stewart are tremendous here. The rage, the sadness, but also some humor with these old friends feels so genuine and is acted so beautifully. The action throughout this movie is brutal, and the best live-action Wolverine action. The opening sequence with the guys messing with him, the thrilling hotel sequence with Charles having a seizure and freezing everyone, and of course the final battle in the forest, where Logan goes to town on these guys, is amazing. Boyd Holbrook and Richard E. Grant are both horrible villains that need to be stopped. Holbrook in particular is really memorable with his arrogant personality. James Mangold killed it with this movie. This is my favorite Fox X-Men movie. It's a masterful drama. At number 2, I'm going to go with The Dark Knight. My number 2 and number 1 are extremely close. Today I'm going to pick The Dark Knight for number 2. Like with Logan, this is just an amazing drama besides being part of the comic book genre. The crime story here is one of my favorites of any comic book movie. The war between Batman, Gordon, Harvey Dent, and the mob, the way these men work together in their different areas of justice, how their strengths make this work, how some of their weaknesses tear it apart. You have Maggie Gyllenhaal as Rachel here playing a compelling role in all this as well. The fate of the city is on the line and it feels huge at points, but it feels really personal as well. Heath Ledger as the Joker is one of my favorite performances in a comic book movie, and one of my favorite villains. The chaos and unpredictability he brings to the story is exhilarating. He always feels ahead and like he has something planned, something terrible he has in the works that is going to be very hard to stop. What he does to Rachel and Harvey Dent, and some of the other things he puts these characters through, the boat dilemma in the third act, working into this mob war to create this chaos in the city and try to bring the worst out of it. It's such a horrifying motivation and methods for a villain, but Ledger also brings the sense of humor to this wild Joker so well. Christian Bale, Heath Ledger, Gary Oldman, Aaron Eckhart, Maggie Gyllenhaal, this entire cast makes their characters so engaging. Everyone plays a role and works into these themes of order and chaos and trying to stop the corruption of this city. Gotham feels so dangerous and trust feels so difficult. The action is tremendous, the bank scene is a thrilling introduction, the chase in the middle with the truck flip is masterful. There's some awesome Batman moments here, even as it's a slightly more grounded and relatively realistic crime drama. This is one of my favorite movies to rewatch and get amazed by how powerful this story is. My favorite comic book movie of all time is Captain America the Winter Soldier. This is also one of my favorite stories of a comic book movie, and it means so much to me as a movie I really loved that got me into other areas of film. I've always loved comic book movies, so this being an amazing Captain America movie and chapter in the MCU already helps there. But then you throw in that this is also an exhilarating action spy thriller, which has become one of my favorite film genres as well, and this movie has so much of what I love. Tying into the MCU, you see Cap working for S.H.I.E.L.D. and trying to serve his country. You get Black Widow and Nick Fury as characters in the story, as well as the introduction of Anthony Mackie as Sam Wilson. It works in the world and continues to develop as you get more of the history of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Hydra, and going back to World War II, and what conspiracies are at play that started back then that Cap and the team need to put a stop to. The corruption and government conspiracy plot of this movie is awesome. It has the element of feeling like very few people are trustworthy. The system is so corrupt and needs to be exposed. Robert Redford as Alexander Pierce is a really compelling villain in how he works in this conspiracy and his past with Fury. And then Bucky Barnes as the brainwashed Winter Soldier, going after Cap against his will, and Cap remaining loyal to his friend and not willing to give up on him, just as he was loyal to him growing up. It's a beautiful arc. And I think this is an underrated MCU movie in terms of how emotional it is. The action and spy elements are the big appeal here, but the story of these friends is just as compelling as this human conflict in the midst of this massive government battle. The finale of the Battle of the Triskelion, the helicarriers being taken down, leading up to that finale with Cap and Bucky, it's one of my favorite of the MCU. The action throughout is incredible, the thrilling fight choreography and stunt work of the highway fight, the elevator scene where things really take off, Cap taking down the jet. Some of my favorite MCU action scenes are here as it leans into that grounded spy side of things. The characters and story are amazing, it's exciting and emotional. The performances and these points of these characters' arcs are so compelling in terms of the wider MCU as well. It's a movie that means so much to me, it's my favorite of this genre. I'll be right back on Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale, but first here's some more movie music, starting with So This Is the Famous Suicide Squad by John Murphy from the Suicide Squad score. Welcome back to Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. Closing out the show today, I'm going to give you my 3 throwback recommendations for this week. Every week, I like to take 3 movies I like to recommend and talk about them a little bit here. My first throwback recommendation for this week is 1987's RoboCop. Directed by Paul Verhoeven, corporate interests resurrect a murdered police officer, played by Peter Weller, as a cybernetic enforcer to privatize security in a decaying Detroit. He executes lethal justice while flickering memories of his former life trigger a hunt for his killers. This is one of the first Paul Verhoeven movies I've seen, and it's not for everyone, but if you want a violent action sci-fi movie, RoboCop is a classic. The world building here leads to some really darkly funny satire of this world being controlled by this corporation that has privatized the police force. They resurrect this cop Murphy that was killed on the job and turn him into a cyborg for their own interests. The themes and satirical elements of this movie get into these ideas of corporate control and greed, and having these wild moments with these executives and their plans and the corporate plot there. And with that idea of humanity and how corporations can often see humans as ways of making money, taken to this sci-fi level with RoboCop, Peter Weller shows this balance of cyborg and the human really well. There's some emotion with this story with those themes, and then with the action and satirical elements, it is bloody and brutal. There's scenes early on with the violence that gets right into things with the darkness it's bringing to this world. Paul Verhoeven's satire is so strong here. It's a movie that has exciting sci-fi action and some excellent stunt work with the shootouts and some car chases, but that dark humor and satire commenting on these nasty corporations and greed has funny moments and is also really hard-hitting with the themes. This movie is very violent, it's a brutal movie, but if you like action sci-fi with these darker elements, this is a great one. My second throwback recommendation for this week is 2012's Chronicle. Directed by Josh Trank, 3 high school friends gain superpowers after making an incredible discovery underground. Soon they find their lives spinning out of control and their bond tested as they embrace their darker sides. This isn't one of my favorite comic book movies, but I wanted to mention this one as a really solid original superhero story. It's this found footage movie of these 3 high school guys getting superpowers and seeing what having this power does to them. The way 3 high school guys having this power could go very wrong, and having these compelling relationships between them as this whole thing develops. The cast of these guys, Dane DeHaan, Alex Russell, and Michael B. Jordan is strong. The characters and where this goes gets dark and is a bleak superhero story. It ties in the high school drama and these elements of growing up, and this lack of responsibility these guys have with these powers. It's a unique angle for a superhero movie that I think works really well. It's a unique kind of superhero movie that I don't really hear talked about that much. It's not one of my favorites or one I go back to a lot, but it's pretty underrated in my opinion. My third throwback recommendation for this week is 2018's Searching. Directed by Anish Chaganty, after his teenage daughter goes missing, a desperate father, played by John Cho, tries to find clues on her laptop. This is also a super unique experience of a movie. This one deals with the detective, missing person thriller. It's the story told entirely through screens, characters on video calls, going through video footage, texts, using the internet, news footage. You follow this father trying to find his daughter, and using all these clues on these screens and working with the police, following the progression of this search, following him make progress and getting invested in how he finds these things out, what secrets there are, what's really going on here. This movie is stressful, it builds the tension so well with the direction of these investigations, and you're desperate to find out what's going on. John Cho's performance brings the fear and desperation. You get so invested in his search, and this fear of a father losing his daughter. The use of this screen concept makes this such a special experience. You feel the stress, the visualization of this investigation is incredibly engaging. There's also a follow-up to this, Missing, that is basically another missing person story with this same format. It's more of this concept that is also really effective, and does it just as well in my opinion. I recommend both these movies. So this week, if you want a dark action sci-fi movie with strong satire, watch RoboCop. If you want a solid original superhero movie, watch Chronicle. And if you want a unique and stressful thriller, watch Searching. I'll be right back to close out the show, but first here's some more movie music, starting with Van Chase by Basil Polidoris from the RoboCop score. That's going to be it for me this week on Not Quite My Tempo with Chris on WFNP Rosendale. I'll be back next week with reviews of Lee Cronin's The Mummy and Normal, and some more movie talk. You can listen to past episodes of the show on YouTube, and be sure to follow my Instagram for updates and more content. Both of those are Not Quite My Tempo with Chris. New episodes will be up on YouTube after they air on WFNP Rosendale, so this episode will be up very shortly, and I will be back next Wednesday at 9 a.m. Have a good week.